The courthouse in Maple Falls looked smaller in the rain. Gray stone. Narrow steps. A flag pulled tight by wind. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and old wood. People spoke quietly, almost like they were afraid to wake something. The courtroom door stood open, and inside, the rows were full. Neighbors, reporters, a family clutching each other's hands. At the elevated desk sat Judge Aaron Whitaker, 63, with steady eyes and a reputation for being fair, careful, and unshakable. He had sentenced violent men and freed innocent ones. He believed in facts. He believed in the weight of words and the way silence could tell the truth when people would not. Across from him at the defense table sat Eli Turner, 32, a quiet mechanic with calloused hands and a suit that didn't fit. He kept rubbing the base of his thumb the way anxious people do when there's nothing left to hold. His mother sat behind him, her mouth pressed into a thin white line. Eli's eyes were the color of the river in winter, too tired for anger, too calm for hope. On the other side, the state of Wisconsin rested its case. Eddie Collins with his polished shoes and careful phrasing, next to the gallery where a young woman cried softly into a tissue. The victim was Michael Hale, 40, music teacher, the kind of man who taught the grocery clerk's kid guitar for free and shoveled the elderly neighbor's driveway without being asked. He'd been killed in a hit-and-run on County Road 7 just after dusk 3 months earlier. A pickup had crossed the shoulder, clipped him hard, and kept going. No witnesses up close. No clear camera. Only a blurry taillight in the rain and fragments of broken plastic. Same model as Eli's truck. 2 weeks later, Eli had his bumper replaced at a shop across town and said nothing to the police. "I panicked," he told them. "I didn't know what to do." The prosecutor called it a confession. Judge Whitaker's voice was steady as he adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Turner, will you stand?" Eli rose. The rain whispered against the tall windows. Somewhere, someone's chair creaked. On the charge of vehicular homicide and leaving the scene, the court. The door at the back of the courtroom swung open. Heads turned. A bailiff moved to stop whoever had interrupted. But it wasn't a person. It was a dog, wet from the rain, fur dark with water, chest heaving like it had run too far and too fast for too long. A Labrador mix, lean and wiry, with eyes the color of amber glass. Someone hissed, "Is that?" and the whisper spread like wind in tall grass. It was Ranger, Michael Hale's dog. The dog everyone in town had seen on missing posters and shared on Facebook. The dog Michael used to bring to the schoolyard after class so kids could throw a tennis ball and laugh until it hurt. After the accident, the dog had vanished, like it had been chasing something it couldn't catch. Now Ranger stood dripping on the polished floor, just past the double doors, staring at the judge's bench as if the world had narrowed to a single point. He lifted his head, sniffed the air once, and then, ignoring everyone, ignoring the outstretched hands, he walked straight down the aisle. Judge Whitaker felt the room contract. "Bailiff?" he began, but his voice cracked in a way it had never cracked before. The dog stopped in front of the bench and looked up at him. Not at the defendant. Not at the prosecutor. At the judge. He didn't bark. Didn't whine. He simply stared, soft but unblinking, as if waiting for the judge to remember something he hadn't yet realized he'd forgotten. "Get that animal out," Eddie Collins started, but stopped when he saw what hung from the dog's collar. It was a torn strip of fabric, knotted around the tag. But dangling at the end of that makeshift tie, pressed against Ranger's wet chest, was a small black plastic fob, the kind used to unlock cars and dashcams. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, a slow astonishment spreading through his bones. "Bailiff, for the record," he said carefully, "do not remove the dog. Bring the collar to the clerk. And shut the doors." The murmurs died. The judge's voice found its iron again. "Eddie A. Collins. Defense counsel. Approach." They gathered at the bench while the clerk took the fob from the collar, dried it with a handkerchief, and placed it on the velvet pad like it was something alive. The judge looked from the fob to Ranger and back to the lawyers. There are moments when a life can tilt. He felt the floor shift. "If this is what it appears to be," Whitaker said, "then justice requires patience, not speed." He turned to the clerk. "We will recess for 15 minutes. Find a compatible reader. Ati now." He paused, then added softer, "And someone get that dog a towel." The courtroom exploded into whispers as the judge stood and disappeared behind his chamber's door. In the corner, Eli's mother shook uncontrollably, half prayer, half sob. Eli stared at the wood grain of the table like it might start speaking. Ranger lay down by the defense chair, head on his paws, eyes still trained toward the bench. 15 minutes stretched into 20. When the door opened again, Judge Whitaker looked different, older somehow but also awake. The clerk placed a small monitor on the corner of the bench. The bailiff set a speaker beside it. "We were able to retrieve 4 files, Your Honor," the clerk said. Time-stamped the night of the accident. The fob was paired to a dashcam model used in 2 vehicles. "Play the first," Whitaker said. The screen filled with rain, the kind that turns the world into a watercolor painting. Headlights. Wipers. The camera sat low, probably mounted near the dash vent. The timestamp matched the night Michael died. The road sign flashed, County Road 7. Through the static of rain and engine hum, a voice, muffled, young, laughed nervously. Another voice answered, older, slurred just enough to turn the edges dull. "Speed up," the older voice said. "No one's out here." "Dad," the younger voice started, but the rest was eaten by the sound of tires hissing over wet asphalt. Headlights flared, the road curved, and someone, appeared along the shoulder, barely a shadow in rain and glare. The car lurched. The camera jolted. There was a dull thud. A sudden curse. A slamming breath. "Keep going," the older voice said. "Keep going. Do not stop. We'll get the body shop to fix the grill." No one saw. Silence fell over the courtroom like a blanket dropped from the ceiling. The video froze on the smear of motion and rain. The clerk's hands shook as she paused and rewound. The judge stared at the corner of the screen where the dashboard clock ticked, each second a hammer. "Next file," he whispered. The second clip showed the car pulled over beneath an overpass, the rain louder now. 2 men stepped out. The camera's angle caught them only in halves, shoulders, profiles, gestures, but it was enough. The older man yanked at the plastic H emblem that had cracked from the grill, cursed when it snapped off, and shoved it into the glove compartment. "We were never here," he said. "Say we hit a deer." The third file was shorter. It showed the 2 men switching seats. It captured a license plate in the reflection of a puddle when their brake lights lit the ground. It caught the way the older man's hand shook as he lit a cigarette, the flint scritch familiar as the tick of a clock in a quiet kitchen. It caught the exact moment a streetlight flickered on and revealed a city council parking permit on the windshield, sticking crooked near the inspection sticker. The judge didn't need the 4th file to know what he already felt like a weight in his chest. But he played it anyway. This one was nothing but road and rain and the world pulling away in long lines of light, until for a split second, a yellow Labrador sprinted across the frame, soaked and wild-eyed, chasing headlights that wouldn't stop. Ranger whimpered then, softly, like a memory that still had teeth. Judge Whitaker's hands steadied as he reached for the microphone. "Court is in session." He looked at Eli Turner for a long time, and then at the gallery, and then at the prosecutor whose face had blanched from blood to chalk. "Mr. Turner," he said, "be seated." His gaze shifted to ADA Collins. "The court is moving sua sponte, to vacate all prior findings and dismiss the charges against the defendant, without prejudice, pending a formal evidentiary review. Additionally, I hereby order the immediate impound of a vehicle bearing plate number, clerk." She read the numbers out in a voice so quiet the silence had to lean down to hear. "Bailiff," the judge said, "contact the state police. Issue a hold on the vehicle and a warrant for the owner and driver pending identification. Close the doors. No one leaves. No one breathe." Then the back door of the courtroom opened again, and 2 officers entered, whispering into radios. Within minutes, the hallway filled with footfalls and voices, controlled, firm, final. People craned to see. The judge did not move. What followed was the kind of hour that writes itself into the town's bones. The older man from the video, Councilman Richard Wyatt, was found at his office, sleeves rolled, eyes red, cigarette pack in his breast pocket even though he'd promised his wife he'd quit. The younger man, his son Chase, sat in a corner of the break room shaking, a jacket too expensive for any kid from Maple Falls. They came quietly as if some part of them had been waiting for the knock. In the courtroom, Michael Hale's sister began to cry in a sound like wind tearing through winter trees. She had wanted justice so badly it had made her teeth hurt. She had brought casseroles to Eli's mother because even grief couldn't drain all the goodness from her, but she'd still come to court to see the man she thought took her brother's life punished. Now she pressed her hands to her mouth and whispered, "I'm sorry," to no one and everyone. Eli's mother put an arm around her, and the 2 women sat with foreheads touching, exhaustion making them sisters for a moment. Ranger lifted his head and stood. He walked along the aisle, slow and sure, then stepped through the gate as the bailiff opened it. He came to the bench and sat at the base of it, looking up. Judge Whitaker looked down and met the dog's eyes. He saw not accusation and not relief. He saw a request, for the truth to be the truth, and for kindness to come afterward. The formalities took days: warrants, statements, a new indictment filed against Richard and Chase Wyatt. Evidence teams pulled the broken emblem from the glove box, the receipt from the body shop, the permit that matched the puddle reflection. A tech recovered the fob's pairing ID and tied it to the Wyatt vehicle. And a traffic camera 7 miles from the crash captured a snapshot of their headlights with a distinct crack in the lens cover. Same crack shown on the dashcam reflection, down to the starburst pattern. When the state moved to dismiss Eli's case with prejudice, there was a rare sound in the courtroom. A release, like when people in a crowded church finally breathe after a long prayer. The judge turned to Eli. "Mr. Turner," he said gently, "you owed us the truth. You should have come forward about your bumper. Fear can make the innocent look guilty. But fear is not guilt. Today the truth came in on 4 paws. This court is sorry for what you suffered." Eli's eyes brimmed and fell. He couldn't find words, so he nodded once, heavy, grateful. And then there was Ranger. There was the practical question: where would he go now? He had no one. Or maybe Judge Whitaker thought he had everyone. The town had been looking for him for months. Food bowls on porches, his name called down alleys, kids peering out bus windows with palms pressed to glass. But a dog belongs to a heartbeat, not a map. The judge signed an interim order for Ranger to be housed at the sheriff's K-9 facility until Michael's estate could decide. That night, after hours, Whitaker drove out to the kennel with a bag of treats he'd bought like an embarrassed grandfather learning the baby's favorite snack too late. The handler nodded and led him back. Ranger stood when the gate opened, tail low but not afraid. Whitaker knelt, his old knees complaining, and held out a hand. "You did what the law could not," he said softly. "You remembered." Ranger pressed his head into the judge's palm. It was not forgiveness and not gratitude. It was acknowledgement, 2 creatures agreeing that truth matters, and that it's easy to forget what matters when the rain is loud. A week later, the school gym gave Michael Hale the kind of memorial only small towns know how to make. Children sang the song he'd written for the spring concert. A teacher cried into the hair of a 2nd grader who didn't understand why grown-ups talk in circles when they want to say they're broken. On the stage, under a banner with Michael's photograph, sat Ranger, wearing a simple blue bandana. A little girl from the front row reached out, and Ranger leaned forward carefully, letting her touch his ears. The gym sighed in one gentle sound. After the service, in the parking lot that smelled of rain and hot asphalt, Michael's sister walked up to Eli and his mother. "I was so sure," she said, voice unraveling. "I was so sure it was you. I'm sorry." Eli shook his head. "You're allowed to hurt," he said. "He was your brother." She nodded, and when she hugged him, the town watched and remembered how to be kind again. The story might have ended there. A dog brings truth to a courtroom, justice pivots, the rain lifts. But justice is not complete without mercy, and grief is not complete without purpose. So it went on. A month later, with the estate settled and the house cleared, Michael's sister met the judge on the courthouse steps with Ranger at her side. "He needs a home," she said. "Preferably with someone who listened when no one else could." Judge Whitaker smiled, and it was the most surprised his face had looked in 20 years. "I have a spare room," he said. "And an old heart that needs something to walk with." Ranger moved into the judge's small white house with the maple tree out front and the porch swing that creaked exactly twice before it settled. He learned the schedule of the courthouse: morning walks past the Veterans Memorial, afternoons dozing under the desk while the judge read motions, evenings on the porch listening to the soft talk of neighbors who never run out of the weather to discuss. On Sundays he visited the music room at the school, where Michael's students placed a basket of tennis balls under the piano with a hand-lettered sign, "For Ranger." Sometimes, when it rained, Judge Whitaker would sit at his kitchen table with a mug of tea and watch the water stripe the window. He'd think about the moment the dog walked into his courtroom and looked at him. Not at the man accused, not at the one who argued, but at the one whose job was to see. He'd think about how truth can be loud, and it can be silent, and it can have 4 legs and a wet nose, and how listening is the oldest part of justice. The Wyatts pled guilty in the end. The father took the heavier sentence. The son took the mercy the court offered him and the work it required. Part of his probation sent him to the music room on Wednesdays to maintain instruments and tune the battered old upright Michael loved. A strange, good consequence that taught a boy the weight and lift of sound. He never touched a steering wheel again without looking twice, 3 times for. On the first day of spring, the judge found something on his desk. No note, just an object, worn and warm from a pocket. A lighter with a nick on the wheel, the metal scarred in a way he recognized from the dashcam reflection. He held it a moment, then called the sheriff. When the officer took it, the judge exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. Sometimes the last piece of truth floats in late, like a leaf landing after the wind is done. As for Ranger, he grew a little rounder in the middle and a little grayer at the muzzle. He learned how to nap through boiler clanks and how to bring the judge his slippers even when the judge insisted he still had working knees. Children learn to ask before petting, and to offer the back of a hand and a kind word first. People came to court a little softer, a little braver, remembering that the law is made of people and people are made of stories. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, when the sky over Maple Falls turned the color of pewter and the rain stitched fine lines down the glass, Ranger would rise from his spot and pad to the door. The judge would open it and they'd stand together beneath the porch roof. Across the street, beyond the square, the school lights would burn a little gold against the gray, and the flag would ripple, and the whole town would feel like the inside of a bell after it's been rung, quiet but vibrating with something true. Judge Whitaker would rest a hand on Ranger's head and say, "We did good work today." Ranger would lean into the touch and close his eyes the way creatures do when they are safe. Because in the end, the lesson was simple enough to fit on a single scrap of paper. When you cannot hear the truth, look for who is still listening. Sometimes the one who remembers best doesn't speak at all. And in a courthouse where words are everything, a dog had walked in, stared at a man who believed in justice, and reminded him that justice begins with attention, and ends, if we are brave enough, with mercy.